That will work. I think we're live now. All right. So, coffee cheers. I barely have any coffee in there. That's sad.
Good morning.
Coffee cheers.
Coffee/water cheers.
Right.
Obviously, we've got Ash Gallagher in the house this morning. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court stuff and other things. And then Greg will say very funny stuff. Like,
I appreciate that you think I'm funny.
Yeah.
Cool. So are we going to play the intro thing, or are we just going to...
We're waiting for you to tell a joke on demand.
Yeah. Don't you do that? Don't you do that?
No
Be
pressure.
funny. Dance, monkey, dance. Yep.
Yeah, something funny on demand.
Yeah.
There. Can I go now?
You can. You're good
for the day.
Who wants to start with their gratitudes?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I forgot about that.
I'm grateful for everyone who is just showing up and who is already sharing. You guys are fantastic.
I love it. You guys are great.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here with you guys today to chat. I'm grateful for the sun that's shining today because we needed it. Grateful that my backyard is a big blue landscape of ocean right at the moment. Yeah.
You would
That's
think I would
good.
give this like 30 seconds of thought before the show starts, since we do it every day. But I have not given it any thought. So, spontaneous gratitude. I'm grateful for my mom today.
All right. I mean,
No explanation necessary.
Your
Just,
mom is very cool. So that checks out.
I mean, I spent a lot of time, worshiping my dad, as did a lot of people. And my mom, I don't want to say she lived in his shadow, but he took up a lot of space in a room because he was pretty amazing. And it's taken a long time for me to recognize how special my mom is as well. So, yeah. I mean, she's the only parent I got left. So what else am I going to do but be grateful for her?
I guess. Way to sell it.
Yeah.
Woo!
She's all right, I guess.
Fred is grateful for the sanity that he finds here. That makes me worry a lot about how the rest of Fred's life is going.
If
Just
we're
kidding.
the benchmark.
Yikes. Granted, I've seen the rest of the world, and that might actually make sense. Don is grateful for paid days off, as everyone should. I think that's fun.
Nice.
What? Sorry, I just read Dave Myers' post, and it didn't make any sense out of context.
I think Lori was saying something about no, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't either.
Kind of coffee
All right,
cleaner.
well,
I missed the context for that. Dave Myers, I'm grateful for your mom too.
All right.
We expect nothing less.
9
That's
people
perfect.
try to call me from different phone numbers.
What's going on with that? Are you supposed to be somewhere else today?
Well, like all different. I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of.
Ginny's grateful that her son is home. That sounds like a college kid coming home to visit, maybe.
Sure.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So, anything exciting happened over the weekend?
I mean, stuff. Things happen.
Stuff.
Things are going on.
Yeah. The president of the United States is saying he's going to pass an executive order that says Joe Biden can't be president. Okay, Donnie.
Did he really say that? I
Yeah.
didn't see that. I didn't see that part.
He has said this actually a couple of times. It's the way that he wants to float this idea that he thinks he can't lose, and if he does, then all of the things that he's been planting in people's heads for ages, for months, that the election is rigged and whatever,
right?
Then becomes legitimate. So if he thinks, which he can't do anyway, but what's to stop him from trying? Because we've seen him try a lot of other bullshit.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Well, how long was Mussolini in power in Italy? 10 years? 34 to 44, something like that?
Yeah,
I haven't looked that up in a while. But he's looking Mussolini wacko now. Like Trump looks as crazy as Benito Mussolini looked in 1942, 43. So, because he knew the end was coming, right? Mussolini knew the end was nigh, and got crazier and crazier in his demeanor and his.
But he was the dictator of Italy from like the 1920s to 1945.
Was the 20s?
So
Okay.
He had like good like 19, 20 years.
Right. Well, we're just better at figuring this shit out.
We would like to avoid that.
Yeah. If you guys haven't listened to it yet, Bunga Bunga, the podcast with Whitney Cummings, is fantastic. It's all about Berlusconi, but it's really all about Berlusconi from Italy. But it's really all about Trump. Yeah. Like every scrap of it, like the analogs are perfect. It's basically just the same story in a different country. Only he was in power for 20 years. So,
Yeah. And George W. Bush was a big fan of Berlusconi. I remember him saying his name with that fake Southern twang that George W. Bush always put on. Berlusconi, my friend in Italy. He would always say, like,
well, and the Italians are doing their own fighting. You know what I mean? There's a couple of activists that I follow in Italy, and they are definitely doing their own fighting and doing some of their own activism. You actually see it, I think, far more in the north than you do in Rome sometimes, I think. I think Rome tends to be a little bit older. And so as far as the population is concerned, and so you don't see it as much, but it is there. There have been marches even just in the past couple of weeks.
Right.
For people who are demanding things on climate change, who are trying to demand, an open policy for immigration. And as far as, because one of the biggest problems they have when it comes to things like Black Lives Matter and when it comes to, immigration is they don't necessarily have the police brutality that we have, but what they do have is they have it written into the law that people cannot get citizenship until they're 18 years old. And if you're a white Italian, that's a whole lot easier of a process than if you are a Black Italian or brown Italian coming from other countries in Africa, even if your family has been there for decades.
Right.
So they're kind of doing it a little more underhandedly. But their fight is just as real against the conservative government right now anyway, which has a lot of ties to mafia and everything else.
Italy is one of those disappointing places from a soccer fan's perspective where people call players of color apes and monkeys while they're on the pitch and throw bananas at them. It's like Spain and Italy have that problem. We don't think much about that being a problem in Western Europe, but it's been very disappointing to watch that. It's better now than it was 10 years ago, but Mario Balotelli, there's some other players that have played in the Italian Serie A that have had to endure a lot of shaming about their color. And that's really disappointing. But I don't know. Got off on a soccer tangent because I can. And
Fair enough.
I know who Mario Balotelli is. That's all I got.
Awesome.
So about Italy, they were sort of ground zero when people started coming across from North Africa, right?
So for a lot of during the refugee situation, especially as it concerned a lot after the issues around Syria, you had a lot of people that were going through Libya, and you even had the Italian Navy at one point that was kind of on the front line of helping pick people up and bring them back. But now the Italian government, just in the last 2 years, has created laws that have basically said that you could be fined if you go out and help. They're the ones who charged a German rescuer. They're the ones who have basically fined even the UN and other aid groups that have gone out to try and rescue people. And so there's now laws against people even being able to get into the country as a way to sort of preserve, I don't know, their nationalistic Italianness, which basically serves the right wing. And actually one of my favorite people to follow is a woman named Antonella Bundu. I follow her, and she has been on the front line of this fight as well in Florence, because in Florence during the 60s, there's a mayor there. He was kind of considered the holy mayor. He was very much about opening the borders. Everybody come to Florence. Everyone come here. We want people from Africa, from all over the world, to come here and contribute to our society. And he did things as a mayor that were sort of unheard of at that point. But that's changed. And she actually told me, she goes, she's a biracial woman, and she said, my Italian mother and my African father would not have been been able to even meet or fall in love, and I wouldn't exist if that hadn't happened. But here we are now. She's in her 40s, all these years later, and we're looking at a change toward the right wing. And again, they're doing it through the laws. The city of Florence, Rome's doing it as a country, and they're now punishing people for rescuing helpless people who are coming across on boats. Italy tries to use the excuse that they're trying to stop traffickers, but that's bullshit. So at one point they were kind of on the front lines of a lot of help. People admired the Italian Navy for what they were doing, and all of a sudden it stopped. And that's been a really unfortunate change, I think, in terms of the migration and refugee situation for the country. So.
Right on. How are things going where you are in France? How are things there? What's
France is interesting.
Do people find out you're an American and express their immediate opinion about our politics?
No, I think at least with me, I think people love finding out that I'm an American. I think when it comes to American culture, people actually really admire American culture, but they also understand the fight that we're going through. When I meet the Black French here, particularly in Paris, they say that, they understand the police brutality issues that the United States is going through because they face it as well. In fact, Assa Touré, who is kind of the leading female voice in the Black Lives Matter movement here, there's a well-known T-shirt. I actually own one. It says "Justice pour Adama," which is justice for Adama. Adama is her brother, and she will tell people, "My brother died just like George Floyd," because they have a police policy that allows the police to stop, quote, random people, but it's really targeted toward the Black and brown communities and Islamic communities, in which it's very similar to the stop and frisk of New York. And her brother died on a stop and frisk when he was pulled over by police in that situation. That was 4 years ago. The court in France has only just reopened the case 4 years later, and it happened because of the protests that happened in the streets because of George Floyd. So France is under a microscope right now. Macron is actually very controversial when it comes to the Islamic issues, and there's a lot of people in the Islamic world that are complaining about the new laws and rules that he's introduced, everything from women not being able to wear niqabs to what they're going to decide is allowed for religious education and things like that are coming into a lot of controversy in France. So a lot of people, I think, in the French, especially from the minority, are actually saying they relate to the United States in the social justice fights here, even with a more sort of liberal president. However, I think as an American, I'm very well received. And, people are very nice. And it's funny, there's a show on Netflix right now called Emily in Paris that was actually created by the same guy who did Sex and the City. And it's terrible because it basically boxes a white girl from America in who doesn't really know any French as sort of this ditzy, stupid girl that all the French hate. And that is not my experience. And that is not a lot of experience of a lot of other Americans I know who've come in and out of France. I think sometimes I feel like as Americans, we might actually get along more with the French than we do the Brits. But the Brits are considered a closer political ally than France, which is interesting.
Tommy Vitor from Pod Save America shares your view of Emily in Paris.
It's a rubbish show. I sort of watched it at the recommendation of a Paris friend of mine who said, "You have to watch it. It's really terrible, but you should watch it anyway." So I did, and of course we've had a good laugh about it. But it's sort of just this rubbish view. But again, the creator is the guy who did Sex and the City, and to be honest with you, I didn't really identify with Sex and the City either because, in my opinion, it's a sexualized version of women that I don't think it totally exists. Now, I understand Sex and the City for some women is great and was on the cutting edge, but to me, it's big city and not real life. And so that's how I see Emily in Paris. It's fine. It's kitschy. It's like a Devil Wears Prada. If you kind of dig that sort of thing, it's formulaic in its storytelling, but I definitely don't think that it's a true view of how Americans and French people get along. I love the French. I get along with the French. And if I don't know words or if I don't know phrases, which my French is, very slim, nobody makes fun of me. Nobody gets upset at me. A lot of people do speak English. Sometimes I'll switch to Spanish. They appreciate that too. So I feel like there's a much more, versatile relationship. Yeah,
I think that whole idea about the French people, being snooty with Americans is that's a Parisian thing, I think, more than anything else. Like I know people that have traveled, the Normandy coast and been just, bowled over by how kind and friendly people are and how helpful. and where you are. But it seems like the Parisians, because that's, Americans are going to go to France, they're going to go to Paris. Like they don't know how to go anywhere else or what else there might be to see.
City.
Yeah.
Paris is a love. Now, I'm not a big city girl. To me, I didn't even like really London. I always said London is New York with castles. So I grew up in Colorado. So I need nature anyway.
Right.
But I also found a lot of Parisian people really lovely and beautiful and helpful and kind. And I had a barista who like knew my orders and be like, which one do you want every day? And she was, a very sweet person. So
right. But see, the way you travel is different than how most American tourists travel. They get off the bus, they rubberneck around at the Louvre, they get back on the bus and they go to Versailles, and they get off the bus, and so the way you travel though is like, the reason there's a barista that knows your name and your order is because you went there every morning. You know what I mean? You like sort of you were there, you were present. And I think most American tourists, it's like television.
Which is actually really unfortunate to me, because I would encourage people, if you do have opportunities to go to France or any country in the world, go to where the locals go and find out that kind of stuff rather than doing all the touristy things. I mean, the touristy things are fine and keep kitschy and whatever, and that's great. But I haven't officially gone to the Eiffel Tower yet. I've seen it, can point to it.
Right.
By the Notre Dame, but I am not interested actually in spending. I remember asking my best friend about it, and she was like, "Oh, it just looks like the pictures. You're fine." I'm like, "Okay." There's no draw for me to go ooh and ah over it, because I would rather go to where the locals go. I'd rather hang out where there's really interesting food. Now, the places that I've gone to in Paris that I love, I've gone to the cafes where James Baldwin would go, or going to the places where Nina Simone sang, or what I mean? I kind of want to do that stuff because that's a little bit more interesting to me than what I think most Americans do. And I would just tell anybody, no matter where you go in the world, whether you go to Thailand, whether you go to France, wherever you go, look up the places that are really good cultural spaces where locals are, and you can find out something interesting. In fact, for anybody who thinks they might travel in the future, I'll recommend a blog called Culture Trip, and it is the best blog to find anything. Top 10 restaurants and wherever, put it in, and Culture Trip will have the best recommendations.
Yeah, I have been on exactly one cruise in my whole life, and it was the radio station that I worked at that sent me on this cruise. And it was like the Cadillac of cruises. We had an owner's suite. It was, the people that cruised all the time were blown away, because our suite had a patio and a separate bedroom. We had a stateroom, a big stateroom. And but we get to St. Thomas, or St. Martin first, and I'm very excited. We're going to get off the boat in St. Martin, and you get funneled off the boat, regurgitated with 800 other people, and 3 other cruise ships, and there's a 4-block area of the town. And then by 4:00 we had to be back at the boat, and I was like, they spent $8,000-9,000 to send me on this cruise. If I had that kind of travel money, what I would do is I would rent a little hut somewhere on the People's Beach in St. Martin, and go and rent a scooter, and that's what I would do. I would go to a place for weeks instead of 4 hours. I thought that was a horrible way to travel, and it just, people were so overwhelmingly excited about their cruise experience, and I'm like, first of all, I don't drink and I don't gamble, so putting me on a cruise ship is like locking me inside a luxury hotel and telling me I can't go outside for 4 days. It was nuts.
Yeah,
it was not my thing. So that and my family, my mom and dad, that's the way we traveled. We traveled going places and being there for a week or 10 days, and actually experiencing it. We ended up asking a cab driver when we got off the ship in St. Thomas, where do the locals go? And they took us to, I can't remember the name of the beach now, but I think it was Shelter Beach, which is where all the locals, the families go and swim. And there's a lot of little divey restaurants right around it. And we ended up having a cheeseburger in the place where the members of the Mamas and Papas were waiting tables and tending bar while they were waiting for their big album to break. They found out they had a hit record while they were all, living the vagabond life in this little, living above a little bar in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. And I was like, see, that's the way you do that.
Yeah, for sure. Just really quickly, I'm just going to answer the question here. He said, are there any places where people have been hostile towards you, Ash? Look, I've definitely been in places, for example, I don't want to knock too much on Sri Lanka. I think actually Sri Lanka is a beautiful, beautiful island, but I did have an experience there where, we were confronted with, some who were very angry. And there is in some parts of the world a separation between the colonial white people and some of the more, majority sort of brown spaces. And we had a confrontation one night with some drunk guys who were really pissed that, a couple of white women were bouncing around. And this was a couple of years ago, and we were confronted with them. And thankfully they one of the other drunk friends who realized the situation was getting out of hand kind of took his friend away. But there's definitely, I think that's the other part of it. Bless you.
Thank you.
I think that there are definitely places where, the idea of sort of the imperialistic West is resented, and that's understandable. But I would just, I think for me, it's a lot less about, if you go in humble, but go in, don't acting like you know anything. Go in, don't acting like you own any part of that country. You don't. It's when people apologize to me for their English, I really immediately tell them to please stop, and that I should actually be the one to apologize for not knowing enough French or whatever the language is.
Right.
And because I'm in their house. And so, just go with that humility. But sure, there's been like things here and there, but otherwise, I think I've managed okay. So
Beautiful.
just to answer that question.
Beautiful. Yeah, one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain was because of his, it was never a food show. It certainly was never a cooking show.
Right.
It was a show about traveling and immersing yourself in culture and understanding a place. And the pantheon of my heroes.
Well, let's shift to the Supreme Court for a minute, because I know Corey's got it up.
Yeah, I just realized that it was actually going on live. I don't super care what Sheldon Whitehouse says, but I don't know if Kamala Harris is going to be chiming in, and I would definitely cut in for that.
Well, there's no questioning today, just statements. This is all of them welcoming her and talking about the reasons for or against, confirming her. So tomorrow is going to be, if there's fireworks, it'll be tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. But I think I do think it's interesting. Greg, you actually sent us an article from 2016 talking about how the Republicans wanted to decrease the number of justices. Of course, they don't quite remember their own words, and they don't really care if their own words are used against them. But of course, now they're daring to challenge the Democrats who are floating the idea of stacking the courts and increasing the number, which again, the Constitution doesn't have a mandate on this. It's all been up to interpretation. So, I definitely think it warrants what do we do in the case of. I do think that Nancy Pelosi had a card that she floated and she hasn't played, and that's kind of pissed me off.
What's that?
And that was the impeaching McConnell.
Huh. Interesting.
That was float. It was floated. There was like this brief like breeze of it, and then it just has gone away. And there's been no conversation and no statements made about this. And I think she was even questioned once or twice about it. And she sort of, well, we're considering all our options, which, here's the thing. Nancy Pelosi, she's had moments, and I've said this before, she's had moments where she seems like our hero for a minute, but then she's had other moments where, I'm sorry, sometimes I think she's useless and needs to take a stronger stand on a number of issues that she just doesn't. And,
Yeah, who will mention Virginia Ruppert brings this, and Ginny is a prescient observer of these kind of hearings. Who will mention her having to revise her disclosure twice already? The clip I saw was Senator Al Franken, questioning her about collecting speaking fees from a group that advocates for the sterilization of transgender people overseas. She took money from them to speak at their events and says, "Oh, I didn't know anything about the bullshit."
You did.
Yeah. And that makes me very uncomfortable. I got to tell you, I haven't been really digging into the Supreme Court fight because it's a done deal. This is how it's going to go.
I think that most interesting part about it now, and this comes with the article that you pulled up before we came on air, Greg, is that it speaks actually to what Ash was saying about Pelosi as well. What we have learned now is that all the norms are dead, and if it's constitutional, we must do it. We must. exercise that power or it's gone. So we can add 2 more justices of the court because fuck you. Of course we can. It's
Ted
exactly
Cruz
what you would. It's exactly what you would do to us. And
Ted
while
Cruz
we're
says
doing
in
that
article,
we flood the zone. Oh, you worried about the Supreme Court? Well, we're holding votes to turn DC and Puerto Rico into states this same week. So go fuck yourself. Right?
And we turn
do it all. Do it all right now.
We make sure the House and the Senate are blue. We make sure that the House
forever. That's what I'm saying. Like 2 more states, that's 4 more senators. We're like the congressional districts and right? Like we constantly, okay, you guys are anti-democracy. That's fine. We're going to be pro-democracy, but in a way that is ruthless. Absolutely constitutionally accurate, but ruthless.
Right. And I also don't want us to paint over all of the federal judicial seats that Trump has filled with the Heritage Foundation's dream ticket of conservative judges. So we're going to be fighting this fight about the courts for a while now, and we're going to need all the horsepower we can to do that. But yeah, Ted Cruz. There's nothing sacrosanct about 9 justices. Okay, Ted. Yeah. That's what he said in 2016. It's in the article that I just linked, and I posted it actually, that quote, because that's interesting. So now they're going to make the opposite argument that 9 justices, traditional law of 150 years.
We just have to stop pretending to care what they say,
right?
Like ever again. Like you're and just saying you're a hypocrite. We're just going to do it, and then they're going to cry and whine and be loud or whatever. And again, like I keep going back to this because it's super fascinating. It's exactly what they do in California. Republicans cry and whine and yell and accomplish fucking nothing because they're never in power.
Right.
So let them yell. Yeah, you're totally, man, those are adorable words.
Most people don't realize, but Kamala Harris's answer, like her approach to that, was actually very interesting to me, because what most people have done is they've criticized what she didn't answer the question. I'm like, no. The reason that she's going around it, and she ends with, okay, let's talk about stacking the courts. What she's doing is she's saying, based off everything that you've done, let me present it to you. Okay, now let's have that conversation. She's floating it to say, we are considering this because of what you've done. But of course, she's not going to give away whether or not they're officially going to do that, because that actually wouldn't be wise for her to do.
Not before the election. I completely agree.
But they're making a big noise about that. Oh, they're not answering the question, so clearly they're gonna. Well, okay.
Maybe
I don't think that's going to cost them any
votes.
I don't think that's going to cost them any votes.
That's exactly it. Like it's yet another one of those 60-40, 70-30 topics. Nobody thinks you should be cramming through a Supreme Court justice right now who isn't like, right up Fox News's ass. Right. So like it's one of those things that we win on in the polls, and it doesn't serve us to talk about it. But I do like, and Kamala Harris literally did this, and of course Ash described it better than this. But she really did pull the fuck around and find out strategy.
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting too is I saw somebody, and I think maybe one of you boys have also put this up, but it was like a tweet that someone had written that basically said something to the effect of just because a woman has a longer leash under the patriarchy, it's still a leash and she's still a dog. And I don't know the person who put this up, but it was so interesting because that is who this candidate is. She's this woman who promotes the agenda of patriarchy and promotes the agenda of an abusive patriarchy, but she's been given a little bit of a leash. So that way, the Republicans be like, CC, we got a woman, CC. And it's like, but no, it's not enough because she's actually just your dog.
It's Clarence Thomas. It's fucking Clarence Thomas again.
Yeah. Well, he's also somebody that needs to go away.
Yeah. So this is like the Alito and Clarence Thomas wrote a letter. I heard about this on I actually Love It or Leave It. Wrote a letter suggesting that when they have the court that they want to have, they're going to overturn gay marriage.
Yep.
Oh, you want to talk about stacking the court? Let's add another 9. I don't give a fuck. Like, that's just ridiculous.
Right.
But they'll do it. Like, this is the thing that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. They will do all of this shit, right? They'll turn the United States into a theocracy while, Pence is up there saying like, oh, we would never. Oh my goodness. Oh, how dare you know what I mean? They'll constantly, they'll snake their way out of it, but they will absolutely do everything that they're threatening to do.
Here's the interesting thing though, and this actually goes into a topic that I definitely wanted to make sure we touched on today. And that is, this is what helps encourage the patriarchal domestic violence against the culture in the country. So for those who may not know, it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it's interesting because everything that we're talking about in the politics right now is gaslighting, abuse, manipulation, emotional confusion and chaos, which is exactly what abusers do. And it's interesting because when we begin to talk about the aspects, and I know, Greg, you and I've actually done this before, but when we begin to talk about the aspects of sort of familial domestic violence, it really does relate to our social situation and what's happening right now, right, completely with the Republican leadership. And we need to be really, really aware of that. We need to be having open, hard, difficult conversations that this is what's happened, and we've allowed it and enabled it, and we need to stop it. We need to choose. That is what voting will do. That is what, protesting is doing. These are the ways that we confront it so that we can change it and we can get out from under the abusive relationship that we have with this leadership that allows them to get away with the lies and the bullshit that continue to happen.
Right. It certainly wasn't the Minnesota political structure or law enforcement structure that invented the Duluth model for treating domestic violence abusers. It was the women who started a shelter for battered women that began to put together a program that would hold the community accountable. In other words, you punish a guy by put him in jail for 60 days. He gets out, he goes right back to the relationship and continues abusing the person that he was victimizing before, sometimes for decades, and often fatally. Right. And so, there needed to be a change. And it wasn't some congressman or senator or state legislator or mayor or police chief that said, hey, we need to change how we're doing this. It was women, who had, many of them, gained their independence from abusive relationships and started to shelter other women who showed us the blueprint for how that problem should be treated. So it never, like any other systemic social change, it doesn't come from it comes from conflict with the power structure, right? And sometimes the power structure recognizes the moment and acts, but usually only when it's in their self-interest. In other words, while we all want to value Martin Luther King and the peaceful protest movement of the civil rights era, the threat of having your cities burned down around you was such that Lyndon Johnson really kind of had no choice but to take it seriously. He recognized that the cities most likely to suffer that kind of violence and destruction were cities that, in the South.
Right.
So, and I'm not saying that these women who founded the BIP program idea, battery intervention program idea, were, threatening to burn the city down, but the fatality rate was alarming. And it was in a very small part of Minnesota where, they had a spike in domestic violence homicides of women and sometimes children. And they said, well, shit, we have to do something. And that's when these advocates for domestic violence victims stepped up and said, well, we know exactly why they do what they do. And what we need to do we need to stop thinking about it as an anger problem. We need to start thinking about it as a power and control problem.
Well, and the thing is we've had a spike we've actually had a spike in domestic violence cases this year because of the COVID-19 and the lockdowns and stuff.
People are home.
And I understand the elements of trying to, keep people home and trying to manage the disease. I get all of that. But one of the things that did not get addressed and that has not been addressed properly at all is the numbers that have went up of emergency calls of people who were being beaten more, being hurt more, being manipulated more. Mostly women. There were probably some men in those situations as well. I think the statistics is 1 in 4 women, 1 in 9 men. So, the stats are there, but the uptick went sky high during all of this. And I think it's something that we need to pay attention to because actually domestic violence plays into everything from social programs to education and to our economic situations. You have a lot of women, you have a lot of survivors who are people who they don't make the income, they don't make an income at all, or they make less of an income, and their partner is the one who's been bringing it home and now uses it to control them because there's less coming in because of COVID. So this changes the entire dynamics of all of this. And as someone who has been through it, both as a young person in my own house where both parents were deeply abusive when to an ex-husband and all of that, dealing with that abuse as well, it is very, very, very hard to get out. And it is very, very hard when the culture continues to enable it.
Yeah.
And it continues to enable it through religion, through politics, through economy, through a variety of ways that are ultimately very patriarchal and imperialistic. And it's brought into the home. And it's something that I think that we have to really begin to recognize. I think one of the things that I feel like is really necessary right now is to address the evangelical communities, because evangelicals are very far right. They're very Trumpian. And I don't know if anyone comes from that background that watches this show or has had a history with that background. But certainly I grew up with this whole Take America Back for God idea that informed how families were meant to function as well. Not just how the church functioned within the country, the American church functioned within the country, but how people acted at home. And what it created was the goal was things like submission and obedience and achieving a particular goal that was very bootstraps mentality and that was very capitalistic.
Yeah.
And as a result, it didn't take into consideration the mental health or the mental wellness of women and children.
And not just the mental. Now we know from the ACEs score that a child that goes through, repeated trauma of watching their mother be abused is going to have bad health outcomes generally, not just related to, we expect substance abuse, tobacco use, alcohol abuse. We expect those things to come from children that are trying to hide from that violence. But we now know that 20, 30 years later, more kidney problems, more heart problems, more pulmonary problems. That's a real thing that we have data on, a lot of data.
Well, and that's interesting that you bring that up, because, while I grew up in a house where, both had their issues, their addictions, their abuses, their problems, one of the biggest issues that happened, or that I watched happen, was 100% of the weight was put on my mother. And that wasn't okay. That doesn't mean she didn't have her own issues, but 100% of the weight was put on her. And by that happening, do
you mean like not why doesn't she just leave? Is that what we're talking about?
No. She was the problem. She wasn't in line. She needed to support her husband.
Yeah. Okay.
And then a terrible version of masculinity. Like I remember being in quote counseling sessions in church, family counseling, where I'm watching both male figures in that room, including the counselor, talk about how terrible she is. And then he's given a false sense of masculinity, that because his house isn't in order, he's a failure as a man. And they're actually both doing it to each other. But the problem is the weight is put on her. She's the bad one.
Right.
She's the one that causes the problems. She's the one that made everything go wrong. She's the one that is the only one that's narcissistic or abusive, when actually it was both. And the problem is when he didn't have to take any responsibility, and when his responsibility was a false sense of humility of, oh, I failed my household because I'm supposed to be the head of the household. Right. Instead of an even relationship for them both, for which they could edify and contribute to one another. It then created the space where I think her addictions and her issues got worse. And I knew that something was wrong with this, but I didn't have the language for it as a kid. I didn't understand how that was supposed to play out, because sadly, we were in a church that preached the opposite. We were in a church that preached this patriarchal view that carried into the public sphere and in the private sphere, and it damages a lot of families. And there's actually statistics that are showing the number of women that are leaving churches right now. And because they'll leave an abusive relationship and then they leave their church. Right. Because unfortunately, the institution has adopted a bad culture of patriarchal capitalism that has been infected the faith, a good faith, a beautiful tradition of faith and spirituality.
I've encountered
about Christianity or Jesus, to me, none of that matters. It's the teachings of Jesus were about the poor. He raised up women. There were women that supported his. In fact, the reason he was able to travel around and preach was because women were paying for him, and his 12 followers. Even the scriptures that talk about women submit to their husbands. That's actually a bad, poor English translation. That's not the word. The word is not submit. It's actually elevating women. And the original I was actually reading some different resources not long ago that was talking about the scripture in Ephesians that talks about, women submit to your husbands. The word is not submit. The word is an ancient Greek word that actually meant support, as in a military sort of way where the military comes together and they support one another. So what it was commanding women to do was be a support system for your family and lead. And then it was telling husbands to treat their wives as fellow heirs. So it was basically creating an equality and lifting up women, because the other issue is there was a lot more women who were converting to Christianity at that point than there were men. So it was saying, for your unbelieving husband, still be his support, surround and protect him anyway, even though he may not necessarily believe the same as you.
Yeah. So while we're on that line, one of the things when I'm explaining patriarchy to men, which is fun, because they have to listen in my class or go to jail. So I have a captive audience. Yeah. And do I power trip on that? Yeah, a little bit. Like when I talk about like women who are invested in the patriarchy, like this Supreme Court nominee, and I don't want to single her out, but there are lots of women who are invested in these patriarchal domination systems. And one of the best examples I have is that, they all know about Sparta, if for no other reason than because of the movie, The 300, and the comic book or the graphic novel. I'll say they had a saying in Sparta. It was, come back with your shield or on it, right? Other than your home, the most expensive thing a Greek citizen owned was his shield. They were heavy. They were made of bronze. They were finely crafted. They were like the single biggest investment of their life. And so the lesson that mothers were teaching their sons was, the first thing you do when you need to run away from a battle is drop the thing that weighs 50 pounds. Come back with your shield or on it, meaning it would be better for you to die than to live and having had to run away from a battle. Women told their sons that. That's the thing that was, the matriarchy of Sparta was that invested in the patriarchy of Sparta. That's what mothers told their sons.
Is that the women who contribute to the patriarchy are the women who are still caught in the lie. They're still caught in the lie of the patriarchal lie that says that in order to gain power, you hang on the coattails of men. And ultimately what happens then is and this is an issue between white women and black women, that it's constant conversation as well, where, a lot of white women don't gain their independence because essentially what they do is they hold on to whatever the man has told them or the male leadership has told them, and so on and so forth. And that's incredibly problematic. So it's breaking that lie. And most of those women don't know what to do, don't know how to do that, or they continue with whatever power they're given, for example, like the Supreme Court justice and other women who have basically gotten permission to be in their places of, quote, leadership, claiming that, they were given more freedom. So I think that we've created a system in America, especially in the modern day and age, that has emphasized the element of patriarchal rule as, quote, of God's law, and that's really dangerous. And unfortunately, it's infected the secular communities as well as the religious communities, both alike. I mean, it's even for a person who says that they're atheist, we have to break from the idea that to me, religion was used as the excuse, and then it spreads throughout. It spreads throughout all communities as well, especially when you have religious people over the past, we'll say 30 years, that have become even more dominant than they ever were in the history of our country. I mean, really since Falwell Sr. It's not that religion didn't have any play or didn't have any influence previous to that, but when you really begin to look at Christianity's influence on our politics, it really begins in the late 70s, after Roe v. Wade, when Sr. begins to see an opportunity to use things like abortion, LGBT, drug use, coming out of kind of the hippie movement or the Jesus movement, which is a lot of the hippie kids who kind of converted to Christianity, or you had, lots of different things like that, where he begins to see opportunities to gain control and gain power for, quote, what he wanted to be a Christian majority.
Yeah.
So it's not that religion didn't have a say before, it's just that it gained control about 40, 50 years ago. And I think that now we have to break that, because we do have guys like Buttigieg who are going, I love God and I'm gay, and why is my marriage, my loving, consensual marriage, even a topic of conversation when you have, the majority of the girls that are showing up at Planned Parenthood are evangelical girls who are sneaking behind their parents' back.
Right. Right. By the way, since we're in Breast Cancer Awareness Month, the pink ribbons do not stop breast cancer or do cancer screenings. You know who does? Planned fucking Parenthood.
Yep.
So that's, if you want to end breast cancer, you want to reduce the number of women who die or are, or are sick with breast cancer, support Planned Parenthood. Same thing with the whole anti-abortion idea. No, making abortion illegal is not going to stop abortions. It's going to stop safe abortions.
Correct. It's going to say, and that's actually what Roe v. Wade did. Roe v. Wade wasn't actually about abortions or no abortions. It was about safe abortions. And the problem is that, and people don't realize that even at the turn of the 20th century, nuns were helping women get abortions.
Yeah.
And hiding it from their families.
It's actually a subplot in Boardwalk Empire, the HBO series with Steve Buscemi about the Irish gangster.
I think it was also in, there was one with Clive Owen. There was another like medical show with Clive Owen that was in, where it was also a subplot as well, because there was a few women. Yeah. Cider House Rules was all about that as well.
Yeah, I love John Irving. Yeah.
So no, look, that's the thing is that abortion was not even really a major political issue among Christian people, again, until Falwell Sr., because he saw an opportunity and raised the stakes.
Right.
And this is the thing is that people who claim to be pro-life aren't pro-life. They're anti-abortion and they're pro-forced birth.
Yep, this is about controlling women's bodies. And let's just circle back just for a second on the religious faith thing, because as an atheist, I get told a lot that I'm too hard on religious people. I saw a post by someone on my feed last week, and it was, these men who abuse women, if they'd only go to church more, it wouldn't happen. And I'm like, no, listen, this is not scientific, but we ask cultural background questions in our assessment for BIP. And so I don't have a number set, but I'm going to tell you that I'm pretty confident 75 to 80% of the men that are in my batterer intervention class identify as Christians. Like that's one of the things they talk about in their childhood is some Christian church affiliation. And I'll bet you a third of them have crucifix tattoos or other Jesus imagery tattooed on their bodies. Right. So you can't possibly make the argument that church would fix this, because I don't get many men anymore that defend themselves by saying, well, it says in the Bible that I'm supposed to be in charge. I use men in their 60s to 70s who end up in my class. I hear that from them. I don't hear it from younger guys. But the same way that systemic racism doesn't mean calling people the N-word, right?
Correct.
This systemic patriarchy is, even if you never say it, it's there. It's a system by which men don't have to have conversations about who's going to do the dishes in our house, or who's going to do the laundry in our house, or who's going to stay home when the kids are sick. It's always women. It just defaults to women if there's no discussion. And that's patriarchy. That's patriarchy in action.
Well, I want to address, Michael made a statement here. He goes, I think the church is where they learned the abuse. I'm going to disagree with you because I don't think that abuse is religion specific. You can go to other countries where there's abuse and it's not necessarily Christianity or church. It could be, they might use, here's the thing. China is a very secular country. It's an incredibly secular country. There's domestic violence there too, and they don't actually believe in quote church. They don't believe in religion. The state is the religion, right? So to me, the idea of patriarchy actually comes before religion, but religion becomes a very easy excuse to go to because you can find anything in any scripture and any holy writings. You could do it in Buddhism. There were Buddhists who were attacking Muslims. There are Muslims who were attacking other Muslims. The idea to me is human condition and patriarchy actually comes first, and then you find your excuses. And unfortunately, however, in the United States, the evangelical Christianity and patriarchal systems ended up weaving themselves together very closely. But that's the thing is that it's not the faith itself, it's how the faith is used. The original Greek Michael, the original Greek, I go back to that scripture, the original Greek doesn't actually say submit. That's an English translation that's been run with by Western powers. And most people don't realize that Christianity spread very differently in the West than it did in the East.
Right.
So while I will sit here and say I'm not somebody who believes in the institution of the evangelical church, and I've walked away from that, simultaneously, I will defend the faith in and of itself because I've also lived in a place like Jerusalem where I've seen Muslims and Christians and Jews, and I've experienced a sense of spirituality that I do believe in, a mysticism that I believe in and love very, very much, and understand that the depth of this faith, these faith systems are actually very beautiful. Unfortunately, I had a Muslim politician say to me once, he said, I like God, but I can't stand his staff on the ground.
Yeah. Silvestri self-corrected and said his reference point for that was mostly Catholicism and his experience in the Catholic Church. And I saw a lot of that too when I was a kid. There are lots of parish priests that ignore it. That they the church counseling that I saw and that my friends experienced was to keep a family together. Was the primary motive. And it's one of the reasons in the field that I work in, we don't like religious counseling, because often you're asking women to keep themselves and their children in fatally dangerous situations, because it's, the family is the most important thing.
Well,
and I have a hard time believing that Jesus would say, yeah, you know what, Karen, you need to stay there and get your ass beat every week so your kids can see it. That's the right thing to do, or you're going to hell. I can't imagine Jesus saying that.
But, and that's the thing, Michael, is you said, the Catholic Church. So I grew up with grandparents who were very Catholic. I went to Mass growing up. I went to Catholic school. And then on Sundays, we went to kind of a Protestant church because, my parents were part of this 80s group that was sort of leaving Catholicism and going into Protestantism. But the Protestants took it there too. They just created different rules. And different excuses. And they just, I always say that Protestants are rebellious on the outside and Catholics are rebellious on the, behind closed doors. But you still are going to find a lot of patriarchal, problems. I think that's the thing, though, is ultimately the American church in general has enabled domestic abuse in a really significant way. And it's really heartbreaking. I will share a story. When I was 14 years old, I got into a horrendous fight with my folks over a bad grade in a class, and it was deeply abusive and terrible. And when everybody left the house, I packed up my bag and I went on an 8-mile walk to church. Now, it sounds ridiculous to run away to church, but where else did I have to go at that point? And that was the only place I felt like I could go. Unfortunately, the pastor didn't really hear me nor ask the right questions because he was part of that culture. Instead, took me home where it got worse. Instead of trying to help guide me through a conversation that would have probably helped me express more of whatever I was afraid of, of the things that I was afraid of at that point. And, for me, though, it going to my Wednesday night youth group and going to school were places that I didn't actually mind going because they were an out for me. They were just an out. They weren't at my house. And so I think that, unfortunately, the system of Christianity was taken, and it was bottled up into this boxed version, which, in my opinion, makes God small. So whether you believe in energy, God, divine, universe, whatever you call it in your life, when you box that energy down to create rules and regulations, all you've actually done, especially within the patriarchal system, is you've made it small. And there's no possibility for freedom or liberation. And I think that the point of these faith systems were ways of achieving liberation from within. And you can't do that when the patriarchal system is running the show. And that is in religion and in politics. I mean, we can take everything we're talking about here in a family system or in a church system and put it right into our politics.
When there are 9.
When there are 9. I know. I think we all need a big T-shirt that says that. When there are 9.
Yeah. Hey, Corey.
Or 11.
It's maybe the longest you've ever not spoken on a show.
Again, when smarter people than me are dropping knowledge bombs about stuff that I am not as versed in, I'm gonna let them talk.
It's been a revelation working in the field I'm working in the last decade. It's taught me a lot about being a better human being and being a better man. And we need more good men. We need more men who are willing to take a look at themselves and ask themselves why they won't get out of the way for gay rights, why they won't get out of the way for the ERA, why they won't get out of the way. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of being treated like women have been treated for, I don't know, the last 1,000 years? Maybe that's the problem. You're afraid everybody's going to treat you like you treat women?
And accept that the women come in, and when they run things, they actually do it so much better, and they don't live by an eye for an eye.
Right.
Yeah, New Zealand for the win.
All right. So thank you for amazing comments. So there's a lot of really great commentary here that I
love it.
Tend to go back and read after the show.
My eyes have kind of been going down. Susie says there are way more rules in organized religion in the US than there are in Scotland. I think definitely the foreign view is worth it. We are seeing that in European countries because Europeans have fought over religion long enough. So now it's just a much different story. It's a much different narrative.
It's the Church of England, and Susie can speak more to this than I can, but it's more of almost like a social service obligation than it is a cultish worship thing like we've made it here.
For sure.
Because frankly, and a lot of blood was spilled to get to that point with the Church of England and Protestants and Catholics. So, all right. So That's cool. Hey, you guys want to see something? Like I thought the other night when the fly landed on Pence's head, that was like peak. Peak metaphor. I don't know that this is the local one because we do have a local guy with one of these trucks. But here, this is that sharing? Is that up?
Yeah, I have to do it though. Hold on.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Boink.
Yeah, that's the Trump truck being repoed in the middle of the night.
Nice.
Yeah.
Trump truck being towed and repoed, which is what we're shooting for 23 days from now. We're going to have some sloppy tow truck driver pull up to the White House in the middle of the night and tow his ass away.
Yes, please.
That might have to happen. It might literally have to happen at this point. I'm just saying.
Right.
Since we're at our closing moments here, I'm just going to throw out to you guys that there are 3 incredible women, myself included, who are working on an amazing film about 4 of our Black brothers who are using yoga and meditation and spirituality to come to their internal liberation and their internal peace and tranquility. I think it deepens the conversation around Black Lives Matter. So if you guys are interested in supporting that, we're kind of working with smaller goals right now. Our next stage, we're looking to raise about 1,600 to 2,000 in our next goal. And it's so that we can commission Atlanta and fill invoices and things like that. And so if you guys want more information, you can DM me. You can also go to ashgallagher.com/birthfilm. There's also a donation button there. Everybody who donates gets weekly updates that I put together, behind the scenes look at some of the characters we've already spoken to, and we'll also get pictures and little updates and everything. And anyone who donates will get a first screening. When the film is done, you'll get a first screening, plus being able to meet me in the crew. So I'm going to take care of my donors a lot, and help us get it done, because I really think that it's going to be a beautiful and amazing conversation.
Yep, I've thrown a link in the comments right there, so anybody can get to that. Yeah. Okay. I do have one last thing to address, is that I was messaged on Friday that we made some people uncomfortable when we were talking about who the hot journalists were, and I'm sorting that out.
What?
Yeah, I got a couple of messages about our conversation about who was hot on TV.
Okay.
You guys were making comments about hot journalists.
I mean, yeah. It was happening.
I think it was Greg. I don't think I was doing that.
Okay, it was me.
If I could raise one eyebrow, I would, but I can't. So
it's a thing I did, and I kind of need to take a look at that. I think without trying to be defensive, people were also commenting about how hot Anderson Cooper is. And that's a thing that we talk about, is people's attractiveness. So I made some people uncomfortable, and I apologize for making people uncomfortable. So there you go.
Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of very good-looking people on the television.
Right.
I mean,
however,
and in print journalism, I'm just saying. So I made some people uncomfortable.
Well, thank you for recognizing that. Can I do like a full-on 180 right now?
Sure.
Sure.
You talk about how ugly I am. Is that 180
no.
from attractive people on this? Never mind. That's
I know not everybody is on board with analyzing polls. I don't care. Sorry about that. So I went and did some historical analysis on 2016. The polls were wrong by an average of 4.8%, which was slightly outside the margin of error. So I gave Trump everything that was less than 5% for Biden.
And Biden still wins.
By 9.
By 9 electoral votes.
Look,
So
it's a little bit of encouragement to see that,
I just think like everyone, I don't care about the caveats anymore, because I know everyone listening to this show is doing literally everything that they can. Right, we're leaving everything on the field. That's the only reason to ignore the polls, blah 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 blah. Act like you're 10 points down, blah 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 blah. We got like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks left. I think a little bit of very real analysis that we're actually doing okay right now. With, again, they're still going to try and steal it. They're still going to try and, all that stuff is still real. This is not a like, yay, we won, everyone can fucking nap now. But the interim report on this is just fucking really good. It's just good. The data right now is good, and hopefully it stays that way. That's all.
Cool. Okay, so Virginia piped up in the comments, and maybe I misunderstood. She says, but it was talking about attractiveness, then saying it was not okay to talk about ugly people. That wasn't quite what I had in mind. Like, I don't want to talk about Trump's weight. I don't want to talk about I don't want to talk about Nancy Pelosi's dentures. I want to talk about our political leaders in terms of what they do, not how they look.
Although I will say that Trump does tan way too much. Nobody go to the tanning bed that much ever.
It's not. It's a thing.
It's a spray on.
It's not. Yeah. He's not in a tanning bed. That's literally just paint.
Well, don't
for real. It's just paint.
It's gross.
Yeah.
It's not good.
I'm not saying that I hope he gets skin cancer and dies.
And I would just like to say thank you to Maria for thinking I'm hot, because I am. So that's cool.
And scene.
All right. Thank you, Ash, for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on. It leads us to some great conversation. So,
indeed,
that's good stuff. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, let's break. Hang out on Wednesday, unless we might have to maybe come in and try and do some of the Supreme Court thing tomorrow. Although I have a dentist thing I got to do in the morning, that'll be breaking up. But Greg,
I'm just not sure. I'm not sure. Right. I mean, it's gonna get ugly. I don't. They're gonna confirm her. That's just. I imagine
this is a foregone conclusion, but it is an opportunity for Democrats to score points.
Yeah, I agree. If nothing else, it's going to be a good day, because we're going to get to see some of them like hammer the questions, and that's what we need.
Yeah. Now, granted, like how many people are, like hopefully that'll play in their local media markets or whatever. But yeah, they're doing something that is dramatically underwater right before an election where they're probably going to lose the Senate. That's like 9 cans of yay. I mean, then we lose the Supreme Court and everything is fucked. But honestly, like, we're going to stack it. Fuck it. Like, let's just do it. Let's add 2. I don't give a shit. Let's add 7.
Right. Let's add a whole nother 9 and have a winter court, summer court.
Let's bring Merrick Garland back as a fuck you.
As the first one. I am here for that.
What absolutely slays me is that after McConnell decided they weren't going to, move to confirm him, or no, I'm sorry, I have this out of order. But the point is that would not have been Barack Obama's first choice. He chose Merrick Garland because he thought he would be sort of a moderate, and acceptable to Republicans. He wasn't Obama's first choice.
Because honestly, Merrick Garland's not that good. He's like as centrist-y corporate as you could possibly get. But Obama being Obama, he's like, no, I'm a unifier. Let's give something that the Republicans will vote on, because that's always worked.
You know what's really weird, though, is when it comes to the court, we almost have to like play our cards and have some hope and faith in Roberts, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not a Roberts fan, but he has surprised us a few times.
Yeah.
But Roberts is irrelevant now. That's the thing. Roberts doesn't matter. With a 7-2 Supreme Court, he doesn't matter at all. He's like, if he has a dissent, he'll be among 3.
I know.
It's crazy.
I know.
It's fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Anyway.
All right.
Yep.
So shall we get out of here?
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
And we're going to leave the conversation hanging about what was meant by the thing with Pelosi. And look, I'm not comfortable anytime we go after somebody's physical appearance, except Trump, frankly, because he's just such an awful human being. It just seems fair. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, like, making turtle jokes about McConnell I think we're contractually obliged to do that. So
okay. So if I offended it, there are going to be things that are inconsistent in all of us, and I'm working on my inconsistencies.
Sasquatch is real.
All right.